Hello, my beloved demon darlings. I would be happy if you could leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. Thanks. Let's get scared. The Mothman of Point Pleasant. I had heard the stories, of course. Anyone growing up in West Virginia has. The Mothman, they called it. Some kind of humanoid creature with wings, glowing red eyes, and a reputation for bringing bad luck. To most, it was just folklore. Something parents told their kids to keep them from wandering too far into the woods. But when you grow up near Point Pleasant, the story feels different. Everyone around here has a story, or knows someone who does, about seeing the thing lurking in the trees, soaring above the river, or standing on the edges of roads late at night. I had never taken it seriously. That was until one cold October night when everything changed. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I left work. The air had that sharp, biting cold that hits just before winter really sets in. I work at a small factory just outside of town, so the drive home was usually quiet and uneventful. A straight shot down Route 62 toward Point Pleasant. That night, I had the radio off. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed the silence. The road was nearly empty, as it often was late at night, with only the occasional pair of headlights flashing by. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the trees that lined the road, their branches swaying gently in the wind. I had just passed the TNT area, a run-down, overgrown part of the woods that used to house munitions factories during World War II, when I first noticed it. A figure standing by the side of the road, just at the edge of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe a large bird, but something was off. It was too tall, and the shape was all wrong. As I got closer, my heart rate spiked. It was standing upright, but hunched in a way that made its long, spindly legs look even more unnatural. And then I saw the eyes. Two glowing, blood-red eyes that pierced through the darkness. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop about 20 yards from the figure. My breath caught in my throat as I stared. It stood there, motionless, watching me. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something else, something wrong. Its wings, massive and leathery, were folded behind its back. Even though it wasn't moving, I could feel this oppressive weight in the air, like the very presence of this thing was suffocating. Time seemed to slow, and the only sound was the thumping of my heart in my ears. And then, without warning, it spread its wings. The wingspan must have been at least 10 feet across. They unfurled with a soft rustle, and in an instant, the creature launched itself into the air with incredible speed. I watched in stunned horror as it soared directly over my car, the wind from its wings rattling my windows. I followed it with my eyes as it disappeared into the trees above the TNT area. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, gripping the steering wheel, my hands shaking. I couldn't wrap my head around what I'd just seen. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me that it couldn't have been real. But those eyes, those red glowing eyes, they were burned into my memory. I somehow managed to drive home, though my hands were still trembling the whole way. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature again, standing at the edge of the road, watching me. For the next few days, I kept to myself, not telling anyone what I had seen. I figured no one would believe me anyway. But then the sightings started popping up in the news again. Reports of a large winged creature spotted near the TNT area, red eyes glowing in the night. There were even stories from a few local hunters who claimed they'd heard strange screeching sounds coming from the woods. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that the Mothman had noticed me. I began hearing things at night, scratching at my windows, distant screeches carried on the wind. And the dreams, God, the dreams. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, with visions of the creature hovering over me, its wings blocking out the moonlight, its eyes burning into my soul. I started seeing it everywhere. In the woods near my house, standing in the shadows by the road, perched on top of buildings. I'd catch glimpses of it out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, it was gone. One night, about a week after my first encounter, I woke up to a strange noise outside my window. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like something was brushing against the glass. I sat up, heart racing, and turned to look at the window. My breath caught in my throat. There, perched on the roof just outside my window, was the Mothman. Its glowing eyes stared at me through the glass, unblinking, its wings folded behind its back. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It just stood there watching me, and then slowly, it raised one long, spindly arm and tapped its claws against the window again. Tap, tap, tap. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in fear, but eventually, the creature spread its wings and disappeared into the night. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Hell, I didn't sleep for days after that. I told a few people about what I'd seen, but most of them laughed it off. They said it was probably a large bird, maybe a crane or an owl, that my mind had twisted into something more sinister. But I know what I saw, and the stories. They match up too closely with my experience for it to be a coincidence. They say the Mothman is a harbinger of doom, that it appears before disasters or tragedies. I don't know if that's true, but ever since that night, I've had this gnawing sense of dread, like something bad is coming, something inevitable. So now, every time I hear a strange noise at night, or catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, I wonder, is it back? Is it watching me? The Return of the Mothman. My name's Martin, and what happened last summer is still burned into my mind like a bad dream I can't shake. I was 18, just graduated from high school, and ready to leave Point Pleasant behind for college. My friends, Tom and Josh, and I decided to spend one last night together, doing something stupid, like driving out to the old TNT area. You know, where people first spotted the Mothman all those years ago. It was one of those late-night dares that felt like a rite of passage in a town obsessed with its own haunted past. We loaded up Tom's old Chevy and headed out just after sunset. The TNT area was deserted by the time we arrived. Nothing but abandoned factories and overgrown trees as far as the eye could see. The place was eerie, sure, but it wasn't exactly the spooky hellhole the stories made it out to be. At least, not at first. We parked near one of the old igloos, the concrete domes that used to store explosives during World War II, and cracked open some beers, joking about how the Mothman would probably show up any minute now to scare us off. But the deeper into the night we got, the less we joked. It was quiet. Too quiet. The wind had died down, and there wasn't a single sound except for the occasional rustling of leaves. No birds, no crickets, nothing. I remember Tom looking up at the sky and muttering something about how weirdly still everything felt, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then we heard it. a low, vibrating hum, almost like a distant engine but more organic. It started faint, barely noticeable, but within minutes it grew louder, rattling our bones. We stood there, staring at each other, confused and uneasy. "Is that?" Josh trailed off, glancing around nervously. I shook my head, trying to figure out what could be making that noise. Maybe some old factory machinery. Except there hadn't been anything working out there in decades. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. "Look." I pointed toward the trees just as something massive shot past, too fast to get a good look. But I knew what I saw. It was big, wings spread wide, and those eyes, glowing red like embers in the night. Tom dropped his beer. Hell no. We stood frozen for a second, trying to rationalize what we had just seen. But then it appeared again, this time closer. Hovering just above the tree line, its wings spread out like some kind of enormous bat, and those glowing red eyes boring into us from the darkness. The Mothman. "Let's get out of here," Josh shouted, backing toward the truck. None of us argued. We scrambled into the Chevy, Tom fumbling with the keys as the hum grew louder, now more like a screeching whine that pierced through my skull. As the engine sputtered to life, I looked out the window and saw it again. Closer, larger than before, and far more terrifying than any of the stories had prepared me for. The Mothman hovered just above us, wings flapping soundlessly, its red eyes glaring. Tom floored the gas, and the truck lurched forward, tires kicking up gravel as we sped down the dirt road back toward town. I could still hear the hum, that awful vibrating noise, like it was following us, chasing us down the dark road. I looked back, and there it was, gliding above the treetops, never losing pace. It was surreal, like something out of a nightmare I couldn't wake from. "Is it following us?" Josh's voice cracked with fear. I nodded, gripping the seat so hard my knuckles turned white. "Yeah." The road felt endless, the darkness pressing in on us from all sides. Every time I looked back, the Mothman was there, closer and closer, like it was toying with us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and for the first time, I realized why people had been so scared back in '67. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just a myth. It was real, and it was after us. Finally, after what felt like hours, we hit the edge of town. The lights of Point Pleasant flickered into view, and the hum began to fade. I looked back one last time, and the Mothman was gone, vanished into the night like it had never been there at all. We didn't stop driving until we reached Tom's house. None of us spoke for a long time, just sitting there in the truck, breathing hard, trying to process what we had just experienced. It was like we had crossed some invisible line, stepped into a world where the legends were real, and now we couldn't go back. The next day, we tried to convince ourselves it hadn't happened. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a bird, something explainable. But deep down, we all knew the truth. The Mothman was real, and it was still out there. And after that night, I realized why the stories of Point Pleasant never die. We found something. We had heard the stories for years, always laughing them off as nothing more than campfire tales. The Mothman. That was something our parents' generation obsessed over, a relic of the past, tied to the old Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant. But for my friends and me, it was just another legend meant to scare tourists. That was until last summer. My name is Amy, and it all started with a plan for a sleepover. It was supposed to be a simple night, just me, Ellie and Kayla, hanging out in Ellie's basement. She lived on the edge of town, surrounded by dense woods that stretched out for miles. The perfect place to tell ghost stories, or so we thought. We set up a bunch of snacks, and Ellie's parents said goodnight, leaving us to our usual shenanigans. We did what we always did: watched scary movies, gossiped about school, and dared each other to tell the creepiest stories we could think of. As the night wore on, we grew tired of the same old legends. So naturally, Ellie brought up the Mothman. "Have you guys heard about the new sightings?" she asked, eyes gleaming with excitement. Kayla scoffed. "No way. That stuff's all fake. People just make things up for attention." Ellie shook her head. "I'm serious. There was a report just last week. Some guy saw glowing red eyes in the woods by the old quarry. He swore it was the Mothman." I rolled my eyes, but a small chill crept down my spine. I had always been the skeptic, the one who claimed I didn't believe in anything supernatural. But something about the way Ellie spoke unnerved me. "Let's go find it," Ellie said, grinning. "No way," I replied immediately. "Not a chance." Kayla was already shaking her head too, but Ellie was persistent. "Come on, we'll just walk to the edge of the woods and see if anything's there. It'll be fun, like a little adventure." Before I knew it, we were grabbing flashlights and slipping on our sneakers. Against my better judgment, I found myself following them out the back door and into the cool night air. The moon was nearly full, casting a pale light over the trees that loomed like silent sentinels at the edge of Ellie's property. We walked in silence for the first few minutes, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. The woods were eerily quiet, as if the night itself was holding its breath. "This is stupid," I muttered. "We should go back." Ellie ignored me, leading us deeper into the trees. Kayla was right behind her, flashlights scanning the darkness. I brought up the rear, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when we heard it. A low, deep hum, like the sound of wind rushing through a narrow tunnel. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the ground, through my bones. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Ellie and Kayla turned to look at me, their expressions changing from playful to concerned. "Yeah," Kayla said. "What was that?" Ellie's eyes were wide now, her earlier confidence wavering. "Probably just the wind." But we all knew it wasn't. The sound was too strange, too unnatural. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from above us. I looked up, and that's when I saw them. 2 red eyes, glowing in the darkness. They hovered in the air, high above the ground, staring down at us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Ellie," I whispered, barely able to speak. "Look." She followed my gaze, and the colour drained from her face. No way," Kayla screamed. The thing above us, it wasn't just a shadow. It had wings, massive wings, and they flapped slowly, deliberately, sending gusts of air rushing through the trees. The eyes never blinked, never looked away. "It's him," Ellie whispered. "It's the Mothman." I didn't wait to find out. "Run!" I screamed, already turning back toward the house. My legs were jelly, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I heard Kayla and Ellie running behind me, their footsteps frantic as the wind picked up, howling through the trees. I don't know if it was chasing us, but I could feel it, feel those red eyes burning into my back as we ran. My heart felt like it would explode, but I didn't stop. Not until we burst through the back door and slammed it shut behind us. We stood there in Ellie's kitchen, panting, shaking, too terrified to speak. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see those eyes still staring at us, but there was nothing. "I told you," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. "I told you it was real." None of us slept that night. We stayed in the living room, every light in the house turned on, jumping at every little sound. I kept expecting to hear that hum again, or to see the red eyes peering through the windows. By morning, we were exhausted, our nerves frayed. We didn't talk about what had happened, not really. Kayla went home, pale and shaken, and I left shortly after, grateful to be out of those woods. It's been months now, but I can't shake the memory. I can't shake the feeling that the Mothman is still out there. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up with that same cold dread creeping up my spine, as if those glowing eyes are still burning through the darkness, looking for me. I never told anyone else about that night. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. And every time I hear about another sighting, another pair of red eyes in the sky, I remember that night in the woods, and I wonder if it's only a matter of time before he comes back. It's back. My name is Mike, and I wish I'd never gone out that night. It was supposed to be just another weekend with my friends, Ryan, Sam, and Charlie. We were bored, restless from the endless summer days. So when Sam suggested camping out near the old TNT area, where the Mothman was first spotted back in the 60s, we figured it would be a good way to kill time. Ryan's dad had an old pickup truck, so we loaded it up with camping gear, grabbed some snacks, and headed out just as the sun began to set. The TNT area was a few miles outside of Point Pleasant, deep in the woods, where the old munitions factory had been abandoned. It was the perfect spot for some creepy fun. We found a clearing not far from the old buildings, set up our tents, and built a fire. Everything was normal at first. We laughed, told ghost stories, and roasted marshmallows. The stars were bright, the air was cool, and we felt invincible, like nothing could touch us. That changed quickly. It started with the wind. Around midnight, the fire began to flicker wildly, as though a sudden gust had blown through the clearing. But there wasn't any wind. The trees were still, the night dead silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the low murmur of our conversation. Then, there was a hum, a low vibrating sound that seemed to come from the sky. It was faint at first, like a distant engine or the sound of power lines buzzing, but it grew louder, deeper, until we could feel it in our bones. "What the hell is that?" Charlie asked, his voice tight with fear. We all looked around, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from, but the sky was clear. There wasn't a plane or a helicopter in sight. The hum grew louder, more oppressive, until I had to cover my ears. Then Ryan pointed toward the trees. "Look!" I turned just in time to see something move. Something huge, with wings that blotted out the stars as it passed overhead. For a moment, I thought it was a massive bird. But birds don't move like that. Birds don't glide silently through the air, their wings stretching out like shadows. And they don't have glowing red eyes. "Run!" Sam screamed, and we didn't need to be told twice. We grabbed our stuff, abandoning the fire, and sprinted toward the truck. The hum was louder now, like it was chasing us, and when I looked back, I saw those eyes again, burning through the darkness. They were closer, following us, and for the first time in my life, I knew real, bone-deep fear. We reached the truck, threw our bags in the back, and piled inside. Ryan fumbled with the keys, cursing as he tried to start the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely buckle my seatbelt. Come on, Charlie muttered, glancing out the window. It's coming. Ryan finally got the engine going, and we tore out of there, speeding down the dirt road like our lives depended on it. The hum faded as we got farther away, but none of us spoke. We were too scared, too shaken by what we'd seen. We didn't stop driving until we were back in town, parked outside Ryan's house. The adrenaline had worn off by then, leaving us all in a stunned silence. We sat in the truck, staring straight ahead, trying to process what had just happened. "I'm not going back there," Sam finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. None of us argued. We all felt it, the terror, the certainty that whatever we had seen wasn't done with us. For weeks after that night, I had nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced I could hear that hum outside my window. I started avoiding the woods, refusing to go anywhere near the TNT area. Then the sightings started. People around town began reporting strange things. Red eyes in the sky, shadows with wings, that same eerie hum. It was like the Mothman had come back, like our encounter had stirred something that had been sleeping for decades. I don't know what it is, or what it wants, but I know it's still out there. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow passing over the moon, a flash of red in the distance. We thought the Mothman was just a story. We were wrong. The eyes in the sky. I had always considered myself a skeptic when it came to legends and folklore. Ghost stories were fun, and urban myths were a cool way to pass the time, but I never really believed any of it. That was until the fall of 2022, when I found myself caught in a situation that made me rethink everything. It started with a weekend camping trip to the Appalachian Mountains. My friends, Brandon and Lena, had been planning this trip for months, and they practically dragged me along. We all lived in West Virginia, so we were familiar with the rugged beauty of the region. It wasn't too far from Point Pleasant, the town forever connected to the story of the Mothman. As kids, we joked about it, and over the years, it had faded into just another piece of local folklore. We arrived at the campsite on a Friday evening. The air was crisp, the leaves were turning shades of red and orange, and the sky was clear, promising a perfect night for stargazing. We set up our tents, started a fire, and by nightfall, we were roasting marshmallows and sharing beers. As we sat around the fire, the conversation inevitably drifted toward creepy stories. Lena, who was always the most superstitious among us, brought up the Mothman. She talked about the 1967 Silver Bridge collapse, the dozens of sightings, and how people claimed the creature was a harbinger of disaster. "Have you heard about the recent sightings?" she asked, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. Brandon laughed. "Come on, Lena. We're not kids anymore. The Mothman is just a legend." "Maybe," she replied. "But people have been seeing it again. It's been spotted all over the place, even near the old TNT area." I rolled my eyes but didn't say anything. As much as I loved to tease her, there was something unsettling about the way she said it, like she actually believed it. The night wore on, and eventually, we decided to call it. Brandon and Lena went to their tent, and I climbed into mine, zipping up my sleeping bag and lying down, listening to the wind rustling the leaves outside. That's when it started. At first, I thought it was the wind. A low, eerie whistle cutting through the trees, rising and falling like some distant song. But there was something off about it. It wasn't just the wind. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, more distinct, like a high-pitched screech. My heart began to race as I realized it was getting closer. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting long shadows over the campsite. The wind had picked up, sending a chill down my spine. I scanned the trees, but nothing seemed out of place. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a silhouette among the treetops. But as I squinted into the darkness, my stomach dropped. There, perched on a thick branch about 20 feet above the ground, was a figure. Its body was humanoid, but unnaturally large, with broad wings folded behind its back. Its eyes, those unmistakable glowing red eyes, stared down at me, unblinking. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. It was the Mothman. It had to be. Every hair on my body stood on end as I realized I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The creature just stared, its eyes burning like coals in the darkness. Then, with a sound like wind snapping through fabric, it unfolded its wings. They were massive, easily stretching 10 or 12 feet across. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. Without warning, it launched itself into the air, its wings flapping silently as it glided over the campsite. I ducked, feeling the rush of wind as it passed overhead, disappearing into the treetops. "Brandon! Lena!" I shouted, scrambling toward their tent. They stumbled out, confused and disoriented. "What's going on?" Brandon asked, rubbing his eyes. "I saw it," I gasped. "The Mothman. It's here." Lena's face paled. "What do you mean you saw it?" I pointed toward the trees. "It was right there. It flew off that way." Brandon looked skeptical but concerned. "Are you sure, man?" "It was probably a bird or something." "No," I said, my voice trembling. "It wasn't a bird. It was huge. It had wings, and its eyes, they were glowing red." Lena looked terrified. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. We quickly packed up our gear, barely speaking as the wind howled through the trees. My mind raced with the memory of those eyes, the feeling that it was watching us, waiting. As we hiked back to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the Mothman swooping down toward us. Every rustle in the bushes, every creak of the trees made me jump. When we finally reached the parking lot, I breathed a sigh of relief. But as I turned to load my bag into the trunk, something caught my eye in the distance. There, at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the headlights, I saw them again, those glowing red eyes, watching us from the darkness. We sped out of there, not stopping until we were miles away from the campsite. None of us spoke the entire drive home. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. Brandon still thinks it was some kind of large bird, and maybe that's what he needs to believe. But Lena and I, we know the truth. The Mothman is real, and it's still out there, watching. The night the Mothman found us. It was supposed to be a fun night, nothing more than a sleepover with my best friends, Katie and Peter. We'd all grown up in Point Pleasant, and like every kid in town, we knew about the Mothman. The legend was always there in the background, but to us, it was more of a joke, Something we'd scare each other with during campfires and Halloween parties. That Friday night, we were at Katie's house, which sat on the edge of the woods, not far from the old TNT area. The air was crisp, with a hint of autumn chill, and after dinner, we decided to camp out in the living room, staying up late to watch horror movies. Katie's parents had gone out of town for the weekend, so we had the place to ourselves. I remember Peter was sprawled out on the couch. Katie sat cross-legged on the floor, and I was leaning against the back wall with a blanket draped over me. We were halfway through some old slasher film, laughing at how cheesy it was when the power suddenly went out. The TV blinked off and the room plunged into darkness. For a moment, the only sound was our breathing. Then Peter, always the joker, let out a fake scream, trying to spook us. I rolled my eyes, and Katie giggled. "Seriously though, what the hell?" I said, fumbling around for my phone to use as a flashlight. I found it, and turned on the dim glow of the screen, casting eerie shadows around the room. "It's probably the wind," Katie shrugged. "It happens sometimes out here." We decided to check the breaker, and as we headed for the basement door, a loud thud echoed from outside. We all froze. "What was that?" Peter asked, his voice low and tense. Katie and I exchanged nervous glances. Her house was surrounded by thick woods, the kind that seemed to swallow all sound, and even on normal nights, the darkness out there felt oppressive. But that noise, it wasn't normal. We hurried to the nearest window, peeking out through the curtains. My heart pounded in my chest. At first, there was nothing, just the swaying trees, their branches creaking in the wind. But then I saw it. Something was moving at the tree line. "Did you see that?" I whispered, not wanting to draw attention to ourselves. "See what?" Katie asked, squinting into the night. "There, by the trees," I said, pointing. For a second, there was silence. Then the figure stepped into view. It was tall, impossibly tall, and dark. It stood upright, with massive wings folded behind it. My mouth went dry as my eyes locked onto the two glowing red orbs that were unmistakably its eyes. Katie gasped, and Peter swore under his breath. The three of us were glued to the window, paralyzed by fear. The Mothman. I had heard the stories all my life, but seeing it standing there in the flesh, or whatever it was nothing like I'd imagined. Its presence felt wrong, like the air had thickened around us, suffocating, unnatural. Without a sound, it opened its wings, the span wider than the porch roof, and took a slow step toward the house. "Oh my God," Katie whispered. "What do we do?" "We need to lock everything," I said, my voice trembling. "Close the blinds, lock the doors, everything." We scrambled through the house, securing every window and door as best as we could. But even though we tried to block out the night, we couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching us, something far worse than we had ever imagined. We huddled back in the living room, trying to convince ourselves that maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe our eyes were playing games with us. But deep down, we all knew what we saw. Another thud came from outside, this one louder, as if something had landed on the roof. "Do you hear that?" Peter whispered, his voice barely audible. We listened. The thumping sound continued, slow and deliberate, like footsteps pacing across the roof. "It's on the roof," Katie breathed, her face pale with fear. "It's right above us." None of us dared to move. We could hear the creature's wings rustling, like dry leaves scraping against the house. I could feel every muscle in my body tensing, waiting for the worst. Suddenly, the power flickered back on. The TV blared for a moment before we scrambled to shut it off, terrified that the noise would attract whatever was out there. In the eerie silence that followed, the thumping on the roof stopped. For a second, we thought it was over. But then, something heavy slammed into the side of the house, shaking the walls. It was like the creature was testing the house, seeing how much it could push before breaking in. Katie screamed, covering her mouth with her hands. "Hide!" I hissed. "We have to hide!" We rushed to the kitchen pantry, cramming ourselves inside, barely able to breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Peter had his hand over his mouth, trying not to make a sound. Katie's eyes were wide, filled with terror. Then we heard it. A soft tapping on the glass. 3 distinct taps, like claws against the kitchen window. It was toying with us. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will the creature away, hoping that if we stayed quiet enough, it would get bored and leave. But the taps continued, slowly, methodically, growing louder with each passing second. Tap, tap, tap. After what felt like an eternity, the tapping stopped. Silence hung heavy in the air, but none of us dared to move. Finally, after what must have been hours, we heard the wind pick up outside, the leaves rustling again as though the forest had come back to life. We waited for the longest time before we dared to leave the pantry. The house was still intact, though the windows bore deep scratches and strange marks. The Mothman was gone, but we could still feel its presence lingering, like the forest itself was watching us, waiting for its next move. We never spoke of that night again, not to anyone, but none of us have ever been the same. We still have nightmares, waking up to the sound of those claws tapping at the window, and sometimes, on cold autumn nights, we hear that same eerie rustling in the trees. It's like it's waiting for us to let our guard down. Thanks for listening. Bloody subscribe and stay with us, unless you'd rather face your nightmares alone. Good night.